Hello, and welcome to Dead Ideas in Teaching and Learning, a higher education podcast from the Center for Teaching and Learning at Columbia University. I'm Amanda Irvin, the Center's Executive Director. In this podcast series, we explore dead ideas in teaching and learning, beliefs that, despite being untrue, continue to shape educational systems and practices. These outdated notions, as Diane Pike described, perpetuate the tyranny of dead ideas. Join us as we challenge these misconceptions and explore innovative approaches to higher education. Welcome, everyone. I'm speaking today with Dr. Michelle Miller. Michelle is a professor of psychological sciences and President's Distinguished Teaching Fellow at Northern Arizona University. She's the author of Minds Online, Teaching Effectively with Technology, Remembering and Forgetting in the Age of Technology, Teaching, Learning, and the Science of Memory in a Wired World, and A Teacher's Guide to Learning Student Names, Why You Should, Why It's Hard, and How You Can. Michelle completed her PhD in cognitive psychology and behavioral neuroscience at the University of California, Los Angeles. Her research interests include memory, attention, and the impacts of technology on learning on the mind. Welcome to our Dead Ideas podcast, Michelle. I am just so pleased that you've joined us today.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
So there are so many things that we could talk about, but since we are looking at the beginning of a new academic year, I thought we could start by talking about a book that you published last year, all about learning students' names. So A Teacher's Guide to Learning Student Names, Why You Should, Why It's Hard, How You Can. As someone personally who has always struggled to remember names, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much. I learned so much about myself and why I do the things I do in reading this book. And I'm so glad that we can talk about it. Hopefully, maybe it'll help some folks at the beginning of the semester who are struggling or trying or really dedicated to learning student names. So maybe we can dive in and talk about why learning and using, which you talked about as two separate things, why learning and using student names is so important in a teaching and learning session. And then we'll talk about why it's hard.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for your kind words as well. I mean, this was just something that had been on my mind after interacting with so many faculty and giving workshops and fielding some questions like this. And I finally decided to turn it into a longer project. And University of Oklahoma Press decided to kind of take a chance on the shorter format and this very kind of focused topic. And so it's really good to know that it's out there and potentially doing some good for folks and drawing some interest. So as to why it's important. Well, of course, there's the classroom atmosphere and community collegiality aspect. I mean, these are all very abstract ideas. We want them. I think all engaged folks who listen to podcasts like this, it's something that we want, we share as an aspiration. And this is one concrete step that makes that aspiration a reality. Of course, it individuates us. It's very attention getting. That's something I write a lot about as well, is the issue of attention. And I mean, there's actually kind of some obscure old cognitive research out there and just like how powerful your own name is for connecting with your consciousness and your awareness. We learn our names when we're just babies, like 6 months old. Babies already know their names. So it's a big, big deal. So I think this is also how we can take that classroom atmosphere and kind of turn it from something that's like maybe even an adversarial or an impersonal environment into something that does feel more warm, where we're connecting as human beings. And I think for faculty too, as I've really thought this over and I've kind of gone on my own journey, done my own work in this area, I think it affects our own comfort as well. If it's something that we're not as worried or stressed about, if it's something that we can just sort of fluidly do in the midst of a discussion and activity as we're getting a discussion going with students, I think that is something that also makes class more fun for us. And I guess last of all, I think it's an invitation to kind of get out of perhaps one mentality and into another, because I think learning students' names and using them appropriately and correctly is of a piece with that approach of, I'm not just here to dispense information and sort of put that into the air and hope that somebody absorbs it out there, that we are actually engaging as people. And hey, that's what community is all about, right?
I completely agree. I completely agree. And it's where I see the intersection between this work that you're doing, a lot of the work that you do, but this slice particularly, and this dead idea that students check their lives at the door when they step
Mm.
across the threshold of a classroom, that they're intellectual beings there, but not the rest of, I don't know, this sort of real world versus the classroom space. And that this use of names and the importance that it has in the learning process of like attention getting, making people feel seen, making people feel like there is a relationship between the instructor and the student, it cuts through all of that and emphasizes that we are all whole people who are in this classroom together, engaging in this journey over the course of a semester or a quarter or whatever it is. At Columbia, we're on the semester schedule, but we're all in this together, trying to bridge our differences and learn together as a community. And it's why I think the learning of names and the using of them is so important. And you talked about alleviating some anxiety. It's why I have always been so anxious about it. Because I
Yeah.
love it. Like I can remember moments when an instructor used my name in a class and I was like, oh, they know my name. Like it just made me feel so good. And I can remember those moments. They're so salient for me and so important. And I wanted to do that as an instructor, but it was so hard. And I'm so grateful for all of the strategies that you shared. I'm about to ask you what I fear is an impossible question, which is your book has so many great strategies for learning names. Do you have a favorite?
Well, yes. So definitely the favorite and the one that is standing me in fairly good stead as I can continue to get a little bit better at this at every passing year with myself, is really the initial part of it, attending and saying the name back. I mean, that may not sound like much, but that's a pretty big deal to start getting in the habit. And I think that's, as I talk about in the book, I think that's a little bit of the magical thinking that I know I used to have is, oh, I'll be in this social situation thinking about 55 other things, and especially if you're in front of students, and it's probably 5,500 other things are on your mind. And that name is just going to register once and magically I'll dig it up later. And memory theorists have said for a while that there's no security camera in the head, there's no backup tape, that you can just go like, oh, wait, I didn't get it then, but I'll dig back when I have a minute. No, you have that initial time, both cognitively and socially, to have that be the time when you can grab the name. So getting in the habit of like, oh, a name, okay, especially in professional situations and things like that. Maybe not if I'm at the grocery store, it's something I won't run into again. But if I'm talking to folks at a workshop, if I am meeting, say, new graduate students, somebody introduces me. Okay, so my attention kind of now naturally snaps to that. And as I talk about in the book too, if you, as I do, play for Team ADHD, this is doubly important. I think it's one of the things that for those of us who do experience that, we end up feeling pretty inadequate when it is like, well, you have to have that initial attention, but that's learnable. And then simply saying the name back. I mean, there's no little formula of like, say it exactly this many times, you'll get it. But every time you actually retrieve it and say it, it further ensures that you'll be able to retrieve it later. And it does that all important step of making sure that you did get it and that you are saying it right. One thing to be corrected by your student in the first day of class versus the last week of class, which I think we've all been there as well if we've taught for any length of time, of actually that's not my name, or you say it a completely different way. And our students want to be respectful of us. That's been my experience. They don't want to necessarily, once it's entrenched, call you out on it, but initially that's the thing to do. So really that is my very favorite technique.
Thank you so much. I can imagine that many of us who are listening to you right now are imagining those situations where we've been at a conference or in a classroom or in a professional setting or at a cocktail party and someone has shared their name with us and you know that they've said their name, but your brain has not registered it. in any way whatsoever. And so I love this idea of training yourself to like, aha, I have to attend to this moment. I'm a big fan of saying it back. And I'll just say that I also rely on name tents sometimes, and that has helped me. And then after the first couple of weeks, I don't need them anymore, but that has been really helpful for me in the past. I learned in this section of your book why mnemonic devices to learn names have never worked for me. My mnemonic devices become so elaborate. I don't know if they become too elaborate to be useful anymore. And so I can't access them quickly. But all of this is to say that it was a really fascinating study on why it can be challenging and ways that we can get better at doing something that we do all the time, learn people's names. And it's so important. Like you said, we love to hear our own names. So we are looking at the beginning of a new semester. And I imagine that there are some people who are listening in and thinking, I've tried this before and it didn't work, or I just have way too many students for this to be possible for me. What might you say to those folks who are super well intentioned but think that this is like maybe not in the cards for them?
That really does get to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? And especially the too large part. And I'm going to be a little bit of a snarky cognitive psychologist here and say, hey, if you don't have the right techniques, a class of 6 people is going to be too much. You if you are really not engaged with this at all, it's unlikely to just sort of naturally plunk into your brain. And maybe that's just me being that way. But in all seriousness, and it's just some intrepid souls out there, and we kind of run into them, the living legends who they'll take on 100 students and they'll work their way up to that. And somewhere in the middle, though, is kind of the getting to the challenging point. And it is about your frame of reference. For me, about 50 is what I consider like a bigger class. Other people may have a different conception. So there, if it's crossing the threshold, the point is always keep trying, right? We don't give up. And that's also, right? That's something we often preach to our students and we might abstractly believe, but it's real easy at the third week of a set of classes that's big. And maybe that's not your only class of 80 people. Maybe you've got 4. So instead of giving up, regrouping and saying, okay, how can I get a proportion? And as you know, I lean pretty heavily in the book on this one study and there actually aren't, enormous numbers of studies on this topic, surprisingly enough. But one of them did uncover this interesting, I think, disparity between student perception and instructor perception. And there's lots of those out there, but in this case, it was the proportion of names that students assumed that you know. So if you get even a relatively small proportion, that's actually bigger in the students' minds. Like, hey, that's great. Let's take the win for once and realize that, okay, let's say that I get 20 of them in a class of 100. And here too, I teach what is, some people have said, is the most popular college course on planet Earth, which is Introduction to Psychology. So we know about these. And that's something that I wish I could go back in time and tell my younger faculty self, like, yeah, it's a big room, but get 10 this semester. Next semester, get 15, then get 20. And I guess as well, I personally like to make this little deal with myself, sort of a tacit thing with students, which is that if you're the student who has the comment or comes up to me after class with to kind of add on, and it's great, especially in the bigger classes, we have those students, then I will know your name. And so if you've approached me and say, oh, hey, Dr. Miller, I have a question. And often the question is a bid for connecting, which is a great thing. And I'll say, oh, and what's your name? And that's my little attendance say opportunity. And then I, being a good self-quizzer, when the next time I see that student come in, I'll say, oh, hi there. Hi, Amanda, how you doing? So there's that. And of course, you mentioned table tents. And this is a tried and true technique, but that does not mean that it's somehow passe. Bringing in the tents. Now, I think it's probably good here too to challenge ourselves just a little bit. Let's say we have our students and they've got their name tags, their name tents up. You still won't learn the names if you just look at the tents. You can use them, and that's definitely better than nothing. But the real sweet spot is when, okay, now I can circulate, say, during the first week of class, we've got small group discussion activities. I can even be up front and say, hey, I come talk to the group and I say, oh, hey, everybody turn your tents over for a minute. I want to see if I can test myself. I'm modeling self-quizzing, metacognition, trying, even though I'm probably going to fail. And that's going to help me actually start to learn. So as a tool for learning, they can also be really good as well in a large class situation.
I'd never thought about that. That's a great idea. I think we are all going to take away, I certainly am, this idea that we have to have a growth mindset when it comes to learning names. The number of times I've said out loud to people, like, oh, I'm just really bad at names. I'm just really bad at names. I can get better. I can definitely get better. Tell me if I get this right. I might be paraphrasing and slightly editorializing something that you just said, which is when we learn a portion of student names, students think that we have learned a larger percentage than we have. So that's great for us. That we're always trying, we're always at our growing edge. But that even learning like a portion of student names can have an impact on the class environment. Like if students believe that we are trying to learn their names, that we have made it clear that learning their names is important to us, and that we're using even a portion of student names, this is, I'm extrapolating a bit here, but it has an impact on the environment and the climate in the classroom. That this is not going to be a classroom where you are just a sort of, a brain in a jar sitting in a seat, but that rather we are interested in who's showing up and engaging them in discussion. Did I get that right, or did I editorialize too much?
Oh, I mean, I would call it a springboard. You got the empirical finding is there. And I was a little surprised when I got into the work. Is there a whole bunch of kind of head-to-head clinical trial style, like, oh, we did it here, we didn't do it there, and then this happened to this learning or this comprehension, or there's not a lot of that, and folks can definitely email me, email me or message me if there's something out there that I'm missing. I'd love to see it. But yes, if you get even some proportion, and it does, that the brain in the jar idea, I mean, I map that onto what I also share in the book of just really, if not exactly falling on my face the very first semester that I taught, which was teaching essentially the breakout sessions at this big state school. That was the concept of like, oh, we'll have this huge course, but it'll be fine because these graduate students who've never taught a date in their lives are going to create these wonderful classroom atmospheres. And some people were able to go in right off the bat and say, okay, I can do this. For me, my model was the conference presentation, where it's all about, heading off any criticism, being clear and having your graphs and being poised. And it didn't matter who was there. It could have been a room full of whoever. I was making my presentation. And that failure to connect, of which the names issue was definitely symptomatic and called out by my students in their anonymous evaluations, they turned it, that was what was undermining me right from the beginning. And yes, it was a matter of skill, but also a matter of like, oh yeah, here's why these actual human beings came to the course. Here's what they are looking to acquire. Just like when I did realize that sometimes when students come up and ask a question, but I dispensed information in the syllabus, why didn't they look at it? There's like, maybe they wanted to see what I'm like when they've seen me from 100 feet away during this course, this class discussion or something like that. Maybe they do want to get in front of me. They've been told connect with your professors and they're not quite sure what it means, but hey, maybe it can start here. So all of that, again, these realizations and crossing these thresholds, I think are part of, sweeping out some of those dead ideas and bringing in some vibrant ones.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Well, Michelle, I cannot thank you enough. Here's to a new academic year full of vibrant ideas and learning the names of the students in our classes and having a growth mindset about this and all things. Thank you so much for joining us for our 10th season, and it's been a real pleasure.
Oh, likewise. Love the opportunity to share.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please review our website where you can find any resources mentioned in this episode, ctl.columbia.edu/podcast. Please like us, rate us, and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Dead Ideas is produced by Stephanie Ogden, Lauren Close, Michael Brown, and Sarah Carswell. Our theme music is In the Lab by Immersive Music.